In this episode of EcoSense for Living, we look at creative ways for wild animals to travel through the obstacles we've created.
When they walk into downtown, it's a little out of place.
Imagine yourself being a black bear and traveling across this landscape.
Every time you see skunk or a raccoon or frogs squashed on the road, that essentially is those animals trying to get from one part of their home to another.
Across the country, organizations and agencies are making sure that wild animals have safe passages. From rare panthers in Florida to threatened salamanders in New Jersey, the East Coast is racing to connect animals in ways that are safe for both them and us.
Well, we have a large bull elk who's in rut right now, and he is walking through downtown Cherokee. As you can see, he's moving around freely. He's not scared of a thing.
We have a growing elk herd that's starting to expand and look for new territory and move out. So all in all, we have more critters on the landscape too, coupled with we have more cars. And so the chance of a collision basically is increased tremendously.
And how many elk there are that's one of the most common questions we get.
And the answer really is, we don't know. And the figure has been out there 150 plus.
Did you get that? That's a bugle, yeah. These are the same animals that people are coming to the national park to see. They're nice and beautiful in the fields over there, but when they walk into downtown, it's a little out of place.
Great Smoky Mountains National Park is more than 500,000 acres, but it has become an island in a sea of development ringed by roadways. And people come here, they want to see wildlife. Well, sometimes they end up running into it.
This is his herd. You'll see a few subordinate males floating in and out, and those are the ones we'll see in other parts of town by themselves. And they're often, I call them our juvenile delinquents, because they don't know anything yet, and they get into our gardens, and we'd like to try to condition them, teach them what places are not safe or not good for them.
The topography is driving where these elk are moving. They're trying to expend the least amount of energy, and so they follow these low slope areas. They move through the landscape, what we call the path of least resistance.
What you see here now is the way the highway looked in 1968 when it opened. The topography is very rough because the ridges are, it's just a rumpled landscape. You have to follow the river. Bear, elk, other mammals, they need to move across the landscape to meet their life cycle needs, whether that's finding food, finding mates, or finding shelter.
These animals roam large distances. They're not just going to stay in the national park and tribal land, so we need to have places for them to roam.
We do research on the ground, trying to understand where animals cross landscapes or where corridors and connectivity should be protected. So while Wildlands Network, we have 11 GPS elk collars out. We use those. Those give us an hour location of the elk, and also we've been able to put up this virtual fence where if the elk moves into the roadway, it gives us a location every 20 minutes.
We also have a significant number of cameras along the interstate, other roads, where these animals, hopefully we can capture their picture if they come to that road and try to cross it too.
We do road mortality surveys, so we record the location of where wildlife's being killed and the species.
We get the information that animals get killed because they're lying there on the side of the road. What we don't know, how many animals get hit and injured, and then go up in the woods and basically die.
You're going to have some wildlife that attempts to cross and make it. But there's a whole another effect which is the barrier effect. Some wildlife will simply never try to cross this highway because of the light, because of the noise. It prevents movement. It provides a hard barrier. And as that traffic volume increases in the coming decades, that barrier is going to become pretty much absolute.
Throughout the gorge, the interstate also has a large concrete barrier, typically called a Jersey barrier, to keep traffic separated in the gorge. And these barriers can be up to 4 to 5 feet high. And so even when I'm working out there and I'm standing along the roadway and I'm considering, could I cross this roadway? It's always the Jersey barrier that I imagine I could not.
A complete barrier would not allow animals to get onto the other side, to share their genes, to migrate to new areas. So you could end up with isolated populations.
This area of Interstate 40 outside of the park, from the regional bear biologist, has been called the bear death zone. And this is because multiple years we have large numbers of bears killed on this roadway.
Our project area is a 28-mile section of I-40, 8 miles in Tennessee and 20 miles in North Carolina. We have 3 focal species, the American black bear, elk, and white-tailed deer. But if we're successful in improving wildlife's ability to safely get across this busy highway, it will benefit a whole wide variety of species. There's an incredible variety of wildlife that lives in these forests. The reason why we're focusing on those 3 primary species is they tend to cause the most property damage and the most human injuries. The best time to actually put in wildlife passage structures is when a road is built. So this roadway was built in 1968. The horse is out of the barn. We're trying to come in after the fact and see if we can make some improvements.
These bridges, 5 bridges of the gorge, really are up for replacement now. So this will be the first bridge. You can see how the concrete starting to deteriorate, some of the metal as well too. These are going to be replaced. And we hope when they do that, what they do under here could be better for wildlife to go from one side to the other.
North Carolina Department of Transportation is going to try to replace these 5 bridges over a 5-year term. It's an ongoing conversation, and remains to be seen how wildlife-friendly these bridges can be rebuilt, but the fact that we have a dialogue and an open channel of communication is positive.
So when we tie in the human safety component, also our pride for our wildlife and the diversity of this region, it really is a win-win, and I have come across no one yet that isn't willing to work together on this issue.
Elk are a historically important species to the tribe. There are elk-human conflicts. Some surveys we've done at garden fairs have shown us that 99% of the people, even the garden, that's where the bulk of our conflicts are, enjoy elk.
I think we have a responsibility to try to bring things back we've lost because of the decision that was made before us by people. You know, we basically wiped them off the face of the earth just about.
The first and foremost thing people can do is when they're in bear country is to do the speed limit. It's really difficult to stop or to avoid an animal collision when it comes to running out of the woods when you're doing the speed limit. It's almost impossible if you're speeding. So please do the speed limit. Speeding kills bears.
I don't care how you view an animal, how it's managed, you should not be against helping an animal to go from point A to point B to cross the road without getting hit and get killed or hurt someone else too.
One of the things people can do when there is a highway improvement in your area, when they're widening a roadway, when they're building a new exit, engage in a public process and offer comments. If a roadway near you is being improved and there's a lot of wildlife around that roadway, that's the time to do mitigation and improve wildlife's ability to safely cross the road.
The Nature Conservancy found a way to protect huge tracts of land in central Appalachia. Their Cumberland Forest project spans 3 states of connected wildlife passages. Can you tell us about the Cumberland Forest area?
It's a landscape-scale conservation project covering 253,000 acres in southwest Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. So really, that's 250,000 acres inside the central Appalachians. And it's really neat how it ties everything together.
So all of the wildlife can get through all this
Exactly.
property
Yep.
safely.
Yep, and it's largely intact forest. So everything that is that's in color on this map, either the black, green, or the red, is largely natural land cover. Imagine yourself being a black bear and traveling across this landscape. There's a lot of it that looks exactly like this, or very much like this. There's lots of places you can move around, move up, down. You're still within the forest corridor. And while there are some roads and some private residences around, it is, for a large part, unbroken natural landscape.
And I just want to know a little bit more about the elk. Are they on this property, both properties?
They are. They're actually on both properties. So Kentucky and Tennessee both brought elk back in the early 2000s. Kentucky actually has the largest elk herd east of the Rocky Mountains, somewhere around at 10,000 animals.
But they're indigenous to this area.
They are. So they were naturally here. Unfortunately, the last elk in the Appalachians, in the eastern United States, was killed just after the Civil War. And that was in West Virginia.
Were there no hunting regulations? How did they kill all the elk?
Yeah, it was a lack of hunting regulations and also outright persecution as well. If you think about a herd of 25 large, hungry herbivores showing up and getting into the crop that you were depending on to take your family through the winter time, I can see how folks might not appreciate that in those times.
So the management practices are working now.
Those animals have been brought back and they're thriving.
So what species needs the most land to roam?
I would say black bear. They need a tremendous amount of land to really be able to spread out, to really be able to carry out their natural life cycle. Elk also come to mind. They greatly benefit from having large expanses where they can move out and not be up against human development.
How important do you think wildlife corridors are in the U.S. and even outside of the U.S.?
If you look at the eastern U.S. as a whole, there is not a tremendous amount of natural land cover remaining compared to what it would have been 600 years ago, for instance. One of the really neat things about the Central Appalachians, in a large part because the topography is so rugged, so complex, so rough, it's made it pretty tough for conversion to other uses that provides not just a refuge for species, but actually some of these areas are large enough it can be an ecologically functional system inside the modern world, which is incredibly cool.
Tell us about the headwaters up this way.
The Cumberland Forest project itself has, it's around 500 miles of headwater streams on it. These kind of little small feeder streams really do provide very crucial resources for wildlife, flora, and fauna that use these headwater streams. But they're also crucially important for us as people, as humans, because this is what feeds largely our water sources here in the eastern United States. We really have a need for ecologically functional landscapes where you're not providing just a little postage stamp of habitat, but actually big, broad connections where many different species can get out there, live their life out, do their thing. The thing that I always come back to here in the Central Appalachians is just so resilient. Given a chance to heal itself, the land will heal itself.
Many coordinated efforts are yielding big breakthroughs for wildlife in New Jersey's Change program.
The amphibian migration is a really amazing and almost mythical event that happens every springtime. Basically at the tail end of winter, when the ground is just thawed and we get our first warm nighttime rains, the ground really just wells up with all of these frogs and salamanders that have been hibernating all winter. And they instinctually know to make this journey down to their breeding pool, where they'll really only spend a few weeks breeding, laying eggs, and then they're basically just going to turn it back around and head back upslope into the forest. When we first started monitoring this site, it was clear that this is an immense population of amphibians. But it also is one of the most threatened by traffic.
We definitely could see over 1,000 amphibians in one night on this road, and over the entire season, which we're maybe out 4 or 5 nights during the season, we'll see about 2,000 individuals.
Amphibians are kind of unique amongst wildlife in that they are sort of solvable problems.
We are moving the amphibians by hand across the road. It's a really rewarding experience for our volunteers. They get a hands-on experience with these really rare and really beautiful creatures.
You know, these are animals mostly like the spotted salamander reaches 9 inches in length and they can live 20 years. So these are giant purple salamanders with bright yellow spots on them, and they live underground for most of the year. So this is kind of the one chance that people have to even see this sort of alien critter.
In preparation for a wildlife passage system that's going to be installed on this road, what we've been doing the last 3 years is a mortality study.
The solution here, since the volunteer efforts obviously are not sustainable in the long term, dragging people out multiple nights into the rain and traffic to try to rescue these animals, is going to be to install under-the-road tunnels and guide fencing to funnel the animals into those tunnels during their migration and during their return to the forest. That's what success is going to look like to us, is all the critters making it down and all the critters making it back.
New Jersey is unique for a number of reasons. We have the highest population density in the nation. We have a large network of roads.
And those roads end up fragmenting a lot of the habitats, even habitats that are preserved. Approximately 1/3 of New Jersey is in preserved land, either state-owned, county-owned, or in the hands of various nonprofits. And that's significant.
We're taking action to try to connect those habitats because we feel that if we don't, we're going to end up in a situation where wildlife is partitioned into small patches and there's not much connectivity.
And that's a key reason why the Division of Fish and Wildlife developed its Connecting Habitat Across New Jersey project.
Part of the benefit of the Change Project is its planning component. So to identify areas that are very important for wildlife movement, and then when projects come through that have the potential to cut off that connection, then we can work with planners and other resource agencies or Department of Transportation to maintain that connectivity. When we run into situations where the connectivity is already lost, that's where it gets very difficult. But maybe we can take advantage of a situation where there's a plan to resurface a road or widen a road and try to create a connection there where it once was lost.
I'm standing in front of a culvert that's located in Bobcat Alley. It's a priority conservation area in New Jersey. And this road right here is Shades of Death Road. The work that we're doing as the Nature Conservancy, partnering with the state, we are trying to bring their projects to the ground and use this thing that we're doing in Bobcat Alley as a pilot project. The idea being that we show them how it can be done to collect camera monitoring data, to collect roadkill data, to put it all together so that other municipalities, other townships around New Jersey or other people can do the same thing that we've done and empower other communities to do the same.
This was part of a regulated project where they needed to put in terrestrial passage so that animals like bobcats that don't like to wade through water can safely get through the roadway without having to go on the road surface. Animals that don't like to wade through water are bobcats, red fox, gray fox, coyote, black bear, deer. You know, that's the mammals, and there's a lot of small mammals, mice, voles, moles, you know. All those animals will follow this riparian corridor and just kind of naturally continue on across this concrete pad to the other side. What the animals would have had to do prior to this was go up and over, because this was all water. And so they would have been forced to either turn around or go up and over the road surface. And that's awfully risky with the amount of traffic on this road. The history with bobcats is that they're state endangered. They were thought to be gone from the state in the late 1960s, early 70s. So the Division of Fish and Wildlife actually reintroduced them to northwestern New Jersey. And since then, they've very slowly seemed to be coming back a bit in numbers and distribution to some extent, but they still seem to be kind of stuck in the northern third of New Jersey. We have been using a wildlife detection dog to survey for bobcats, which has been a really useful tool because bobcats range so widely. They're very difficult to survey for, and a dog can cover a lot of ground. So what the dog does is can find their scat, and we can send it in for analysis, and they can confirm the species, tell us if it was a male or female, and which individual it was. So a tremendous amount of information.
What we have here is what we think is going to be the first in the country. This is a wildlife passage system designed specifically for the federally threatened state endangered bog turtle. It's one of the rarest turtles in the country. And what we've done is tried to reconnect two pieces of wetland habitat. And we've done that by installing fencing that leads up to 2 under-road tunnels. These were kind of modified for the bog turtle. And you can see they have these graded tops. It's not dark and spooky, and even though this is a fairly narrow road, just a kind of a 2-lane local road, the turtles still want to be able to kind of see through to the other side, and that's one of the features of turtle-specific designs that we try to integrate into these projects.
Hey, how's it going? So before this tunnel was in, we'd have a lot of these animals coming up over the road and getting hit on the road. Now that we have this tunnel here and this fencing, they're coming out of the wetland, trying to get from one wetland to the other on the other side of the road, and they're funneled into this culvert that goes underneath the road and gives them safe passage. So we have these cameras set up that I check once a week, and these cameras work on what's called a passive infrared detector, which means that they detect a radiant heat. So when there's a change in temperature near the sensor, it triggers the camera. But the animals that we're focused on here are mainly turtles and frogs and snakes. So because they're cold-blooded, their body temperature is pretty much the same as the environment, so you don't have that change in temperature to trigger the camera. So what we have here is this secondary sensor here, and it sends a beam of light across here. So anytime something crosses this beam, if it's a little worm, if it's a beetle, if it's a snake or a turtle, it's going to trigger this camera to take a picture.
People have been a detriment to rattlesnake populations across the entire range. Here in the Pine Barrens, we have 2 separated populations, and they are separated by basically large populations of people. Our studies show that there are differences between the Pine Barrens rattlesnakes and the other rattlesnake populations that we've studied.
The distance between the Pine Barrens populations and the closest populations in northern New Jersey or in Pennsylvania is just too far for any rattlesnake to travel.
Males don't make it to find females in the other population, and so they basically breed within that population, and so they become more genetically similar.
Rattlesnakes are not especially fast-moving. They will tend to slow down if they get scared. So if they're traveling on a road, instead of a car coming along saying, oh, I better move fast, they might just freeze. And so we have some major roads going through the Pine Barrens that are really significant barriers between the populations. We're always taught when we're learning to drive to watch out for a ball, because if you see a ball, a kid is coming, right? Well, keep your eye out, see if you see something hopping. If something is hopping, it's probably a frog. Or if you see something that looks like a stick, it may be a snake. So just keep your eye out. Don't speed across things that could potentially be animals. Slow down and stop for them.
Every time you see skunk or a raccoon or frogs squashed on the road, that essentially is those animals trying to get from one part of their home to another.
The utopia is a permeable landscape for wildlife in large core patches with connectors that allow those populations to interact with one another because animals can move through the landscape.
This is not a New Jersey issue, but this is rather an issue that we're trying to address with our colleagues and other organizations all the way from Maine down into Alabama and Kentucky, up and down the Appalachian Mountain chain. So
it begins now, and I do believe that it extends for decades into the future. We certainly are at a point where we recognize that we need to reverse some of the development pressures that have already been created for wildlife. And things like culverts under roads, good planning on future road development, they help get us there. The Change Project really is a big step forward on how we protect wildlife in New Jersey and how we keep these species in New Jersey for future generations to benefit from.